Welcome back to Cross Politic. With us today,
yes,
Mr. Ben Kinchlow. Ben Kinchlow is founder of Americans for Israel, an organization dedicated to promoting a mutual understanding of the ancient bond that exists between Christians and Jews. Mr. Kinchlow also serves as co-host of Front Page Jerusalem, a comprehensive news and commentary radio program featuring top newsmakers in the U.S. and Israel. And Ben Kinchlow is the author of the book, Black Yellow Dogs, The Most Dangerous Citizen is Not Armed But Uninformed. Mr. Kinchlow, it's good to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for risking your program and having me on.
Obviously, you don't listen to the show very much.
Now, hold on real quick. Ben, what else do you do? Toby introduced you a little bit, but I think you're doing some other things right now, too.
No, I'm still working. I'm also, you mentioned that my object with Israel, I'm also helping build bomb shelters over there because, as you know, when a siren goes off here in America, we don't pay that much attention. But when a siren goes off there in Israel, it's because they have launched rocket attacks against the civilian population. And so these people have to find some place to run to for cover. And we are working with the organization that puts transportable bomb shelters in various places, like next to schools and hospitals and places where people can go right in and be protected from these bomb shelters.
Wow.
That's hard to imagine.
Yeah. Now, Ben, do you have a family?
Yes, I do. I have 3 wonderful sons and 6 grandchildren, 3 grandsons, 3 granddaughters, and 3 great wives of my sons. And so I've been a very fortunate and blessed individual. God's good.
Wow. Amen. Hey, now this book is titled, I read this book, Black Yellow Dogs. Now, explain to our listeners, what is a black yellow dog?
Well, back in the days, many years ago, when one of the senators was running for election, he articulated Democrats, and they said, well, wait a minute, I want to vote for this Democrat. Well, this other guy came up and said, well, I'm not voting for this Democrat running for senator. I'm going to vote for a Republican. And the guy said, what do you mean you got to vote for a Republican? He said, well, I disagree with some of the things the Democrat has to say, so I'm voting for the Republican. Why are you voting for the Democrat when you may not agree with all the things he says? And the answer to that was, I would vote for a yellow dog if he ran on the Democrat ticket.
Right.
And unfortunately, that is what has happened in many cases today, especially today in the African-American community, where African-Americans vote almost 90% for Democrats, regardless of what the issue is, regardless of who the candidate is. They just vote for the guy because he's a Democrat, even if some of the things that he is proposing are against what's the best interest of the African-American community. So African-Americans are, in effect, for the most part, black yellow dog voters.
And so why did you write this book in this argument? We'll get more to the argument later, but why did you write this book?
Because, you know, one of the things that my mom always told me was you need to, in order to make an intelligent decision, you need to find out what's really going on. So I didn't really know when I was a younger man. I just kind of took for granted what I heard, but I didn't know what the facts of the matter was. And then later on, when I became a Christian and got away from just acting on my feelings, I started to do some research to find out what was really going on. And I found out that almost all of the civil rights bills from the 1800s to the 1960s, from 1854 to 1964, all of the significant civil rights bills to help black people in America had all been passed by Republicans over the objections of the Democrats.
Yeah.
And all these times I thought, wait a minute. And then because we'd been taught that Republicans were anti-black. But it turns out that almost all of the civil rights bills, all of the voting rights acts had all been passed in favor of blacks by the Republicans. And the fact of the matter is blacks just voted for Democrats regardless of what the facts of the matter were. Ergo, they became yellow dog Democrats.
Ben, I'm sorry. I mean, Mr. Kinchlow.
No, Ben is better.
Yeah,
I
but
think you're talking about my dad if you call me Mr. Kinchlow.
well, you don't know my mama. If I call you Ben, I'm gonna get a whooping. So, Mr. Kinchlow, but why is that? Why does it seem like the majority of black people are voting for Democrats? I mean, they're not ignorant. They know that Democrats obviously want more for them than Republicans do, right?
Well, no, they did not know that. And the reason they did not know that was because the reason the Founding Fathers established a freedom of the press and made that a part and parcel of what America was about is because they wanted the people to know how to make intelligent, informed decisions based on the facts. And so they insisted on freedom of the press so that the press could tell the truth about the matter. Unfortunately, if we fast forward to the late 60s, something happened in the 60s nobody paid much attention to. You will remember back in the 60s, there were two groups of people that graduated from college. There were the hippie groups, all these hippies, and then there were the conservatives. Well, what happened to those two groups? Well, here's what happened. The conservatives all went into business. The Republicans, conservatives, all went into business and made the American economy the greatest economy in the history of the world. Well, where did the leftist loonies go? Where did these people, liberals, go?
Government.
Well, they all went into two separate places.
Teaching.
They went into education,
Yep.
and they went into the media.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
As a result, our children have been taught from a leftist, liberal perspective, and the media has reported what's going on from a leftist media perspective. So the people don't know what the truth of the matter is. All they know is what they have been taught, and they have not been taught the facts of the matter about the Republicans and Democrats and conservatives and liberals.
Wow. Now, one of the things you point out in your book that was, I was riding in an airplane and I was reading your book, and
He had the blanket over the book and tucked away.
I was like, a couple of times I looked up and I looked around me. I was like, I hope no one else is seeing what I'm seeing. But you start at the beginning of American history, and which goes to this point about how we've been taught from a particular perspective. And that we have not been given the facts. And it was really striking to me, particularly when you start off by pointing out that initially there are blacks and whites who are part of sort of an indentured servitude at the very, very beginning of the start of American country, the country, and then the sort of the first instance of somebody taking to court someone to insist that their slave be perpetual, forever, not just for a period of time. You said that was a black man.
Yes, that's true. And that's one of the things that people need to be aware of is that slavery did not exist per se in America. They had what they call indentured servants.
Right.
And so you would come over here and you would work for X number of months or years, and then when you got through, they would give you 50 acres of land for each one of the persons that served as a slave.
That's a good
so
deal.
Let's just that as an indentured servant.
Yeah.
So let's just say a father would come and he had a family of a wife and 3 children. So he would then come in and indenture himself and his wife and his children. So if you get wife, children, and yourself as indentured servant for X number of months or years, then when you got free, you would get 50 acres of land for each one of those persons who had served as an indentured servant. So this is how people came over from England and various countries. They came here, all of them, black and white, came here and served as indentured servants for that period of time. Then what happened was one guy got his indentured servant, and at the end of his designated period did not want to let him go, so he went to court and sued to keep this guy, saying, I didn't have this guy for an indentured period, I had him for life. Unfortunately, the court found in favor of this one guy who then became the official first slave owner in America, who brought a black guy over and made him a slave. And it turns out that the guy who did the suit was also a black guy. So the first official legal slave owner in America was a black guy.
Why do we never hear this? What? Why?
Because, as you well know, as we talked about earlier, about the fact that the media, these two people, the liberals, went into two areas, education and the media.
Yep.
The reason you don't hear that is because the left does not want you to know what the truth is. They want to brainwash you so you only know what they teach you.
All right.
And that's what happens in our schools and in our media.
Yeah. So Ben, let me push back on that. Big deal. The first, at least, written case of slavery in America was a black man owning a black man. I mean, obviously, the far greater problem that it arose to was a majority of whites owning black slaves and turning it into even some chattel practices. So why does that point even matter in the first place when the greater problems arose later on?
Well, if you go back and look at my book very carefully, you find out that it wasn't just this one guy. When slavery became popular, some of the largest slave owners in the South were blacks.
Stop.
Many of them, some of the largest slave owners in the South were black. And then what happened was when the South decided it was not going to become a part of the Union, then they decided they were going to make everybody slaves in the South. And so that's why all blacks became slaves in the South. And that's why one of the primary reasons for the Civil War being fought in America.
So help me understand something. So you got a black man who's making the creating a standard for slavery, but then how does it go from a black man owning another black man into just such a racial tension between white people owning slaves over against this? How does that happen?
Well, we're not really sure exactly how this came about, but if you look at the official census, and I think about the 1800s thereabouts, what you'll find out it was that about 3,700 free blacks owned about 12,000 blacks.
That was 1830 census there.
Yeah, in the 1800s, that's about where it went.
Yeah.
Okay? And so as a result of that, what happened was slavery became an issue that was not easily dismissed, and Britain came over and got involved in this. And what we forget is that when the colonies declared independence from Britain and the United States, and America was born, that's when the confrontation between the Brits and Americans broke out, and blacks were citizens in every sense of the term. George Washington kicked slavery out, and it wasn't until we had something called the 3/5 Clause, which held, remember about the 3/5 Clause?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Very racist clause. Very racist clause.
Yes, absolutely. African Americans were only considered 3/5 of a human being. And as a result of that, they started to, in the South, make slavery an official thing as a result of the Civil War, or part of the Civil War.
Seems like part of what happened too was that you have there's a massive like worldview clash that kind of is building in the early 1800s between the North and the South, such that trust really like deteriorates, and they become real enemies. And of course, there's a slave issue in the background. It's part of the problem, but there's also this massive trust issue, and such that as North and as certain kind of radical abolitionists are even kind of going violent and getting really extreme. You got John Brown shooting up a federal garrison and this kind of thing. The Southerners kind of doubled down on it. Like it was almost like between 1820 and 1860, they're like, before that, it actually wasn't quite as racialized. I mean, it was getting there, but then a bunch of the states rewrite their constitutions in the early 1800s, and their constitutions write into them that white is inherently superior to black.
That's correct.
They kind of double down on it, though, leading up to that war. And so it's like all this tension in the air and the inability to work this out. Everybody kind of goes, it just goes berserk, and it gets worse.
Oh, yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, most of us are probably familiar with the Dred Scott situation.
Yeah.
In 1800s, one of the Supreme Court justices said, and this is a quote, "Negroes so far inferior that they have no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justifiably and be lawfully reduced to slavery for his benefit." Now, that was in the Dred Scott decision. As a result of that, slavery became legalized, and that was essentially what led to the Civil War in the United States.
Yeah. Well, that view, the Dred Scott view, was, I think, predominant among white politician leaders. Even Abe Lincoln expressed views along those lines. He said in, I think one of his debates was with Douglas, that I'm all in favor of the white race being the superior race. He also said, and I think his letter to Thomas Greeley, he said that I don't necessarily care if the war ends or if slavery ends. I would just want to keep the Union together. So there was some racial, I mean, basically, like the quote I gave from his debate with Douglas, if he said that in our modern times, he'd be considered a modern racist.
Yeah, he probably would. But you have to remember, back in the day, what Lincoln was primarily concerned about, and you have to remember what we're talking about here is the potential for the destruction of the United States of America. I mean, there's a few colonies, and they were going to not become unified states, but they were going to split the country in half. And so Lincoln said, "Hey, listen, I'm not for that." But
he was also had basically a modern or what we'd say is racism in his views on how he viewed slavery, anyways. So he was more concerned keeping the Union together, but not because he was not a racist.
That is probably, as history reports, that history has a tendency to report things that more accurately favor the ones who's right in history.
That's right.
And so,
That's right. Now,
imagine that. One
of the other things that was really striking, Ben, was the post-war, that first big push for Reconstruction. I had never heard what you outlined in your book. I'd never heard before how the Republicans push all these massive reforms in the South to integrate blacks and whites, to put, to allow for blacks to serve in positions of leadership and authority in the states and in the legislatures, and then talk to us about that. What happened there?
Well, let me just point out something very quickly, and I want to point this out with all due respect to President Lincoln, et cetera. So, and this is what Abraham Lincoln said. "I want to say, I have not meant to leave anyone in doubt. I would save the Union. I would save it the shortest way under the Constitution." He went on to say, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it.
Yeah.
And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that.
Yeah, right.
What about slavery and the colored race? I do it because I believe it helps to save the Union. Mm-hmm. And what I prepare because I do not believe it would help save the Union.
Right.
I should do less, whatever I should believe that I'm doing hurts the cause. I should do more when I believe that what I'm doing will help the cause. I intend no modification of my oft-expressed personal wish that all men everywhere could be free. But make no mistake about it, Lincoln's primary concern was to save
the Union.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Ben, before we go on, we got to take a break here. But when we come back, there's two things I think Pastor Toby hit. One of the most shocking things was the black man owned slave. I think another thing was the shot heard around the world. People don't know that guy who got shot was black. When we come back, I want you to talk about that. And what I think probably was one of the most prosperous times for black culture was Reconstruction. We'll talk about that more on the next segment with Ben Kinchlow. This is amazing stuff.
Oh, yeah. You got to get this book, guys. Black Yellow Dogs, Ben Kinchlow.